When it comes to writing novels, not every project is going to work out. Sometimes you're going to have to force yourself to finish a novel. Other times you're going to give up on it and come back to it months or even years later. Today I want to talk about finishing and resurrecting your projects, so stick around. By the way, my name is Brandon McNulty. I'm the author of Bad Parts, also the author of Entry Wounds, and welcome to my writing channel. One of my subscribers requested a video on the subject of how to finish a novel. He had this problem where he would lose interest midway through and he'd jump onto other projects. He said, Brandon, I can't get through the whole thing. How do you finish writing a novel? And then he also said, well, I've given up on so many novels that I'm also worried about how do I resurrect stories that I was passionate about that I gave up on. Now, I have 4 tips for you today that'll help you finish writing a novel. The first tip is pretty common advice, and it's that you need to know your ending. And when it comes to knowing your ending, this is very important because if you know the ending of your story, you have something to shoot for. You know that, okay, I'm starting right here, but I have to get to this point here. And when I say know your ending, I'm not saying you have to know it perfectly. I'm not saying you have to know every single detail. Just have a general idea of how your story ends. Is the hero going to fight the villain and win? Is the hero going to rescue his daughter from terrorists? Is this hero going to solve a mystery or catch a culprit or whatever it is? Know your ending. And it doesn't even have to be a good ending. Just have an ending. Just have something to shoot toward over the course of your story. Tip number 2 is something I talked about in a recent video. It's the idea of the clock and the gun. And this is something that's brought up in Chuck Palahniuk's writing guide, Consider This. I've talked about it on the channel a lot recently, but the clock and the gun are 2 simple techniques that you can use to focus your story, keep it honest from start to finish. And I'm not going to beat this to death, but basically what they are, the clock is anything that limits a story's length by suggesting it will end at a certain time. So if you're writing a Christmas story, the audience knows as they're reading it that it's going to end most likely on Christmas Day or right around Christmas Day. So that helps us gauge how long the story is going to take place. And if you're writing the story, that helps you gauge when things need to happen by. Now the gun is a little different. The gun is an object, a character, or a dynamic that is going to be introduced early on in your story. It's going to be shown to the audience, and then later toward the end it can be pulled at any moment to bring the story to its finish. And this is basically going to hint at how your story will climax. A good example of this comes from the book version of The Shining by Stephen King. Early on, it is mentioned that the furnace inside the hotel needs to be maintained or else it will explode. And guess what? Toward the end of the book, it is not maintained and it explodes and it brings about the climax. Tip number 3 is to study plot structure. This is so important because it allows you to create a roadmap inside your head and to stick to it over the course of the story. Once you reach your midpoint, you know that, okay, my characters need to go on the attack for the next maybe 25% of the story. Then around the 75% mark, something terrible has to happen, and then right after that they need to regroup and head toward the final battle or the final confrontation or whatever it is. If you have plot structure in mind, it'll be a lot easier to write your stories. I can recommend a bunch of different books on plot structure. Save the Cat and Save the Cat Writes a Novel are great for beginners. If you want something a little more in-depth, check out Story Engineering by Larry Brooks. And if you want something really advanced, check out the book Into the Woods by John York. I've been reading this one recently and it's great. It's about 5-act story structure. It's something a little different from the common 3-act structure that's taught. So if you're looking for some new techniques, some new understandings of story, check out that book, and I will link all of those in the description below. And then tip number 4 for finishing your novel is to fight to the bitter end. You're always going to have moments when you're writing a long work like a novel where you start thinking to yourself, okay, this isn't working out, or this was a complete mess, or why did I even bother doing this in the first place? But if you get like a good percentage into the story, you might as well finish it. If you're 50% or 60% into it, or you have a pretty good idea that you're heading toward the end, and things maybe everything fell apart, force yourself to finish it. Try writing it without dialogue. That'll speed things up a little bit. You just write down the clear-cut events of what happens. Just find a way to get it done, because when you do get it done like that, you can explore some wild ideas toward the end of the story. You can take risks because you know that, okay, I'm not keeping this draft, it's not working out, at least I can try new things, maybe I get something cool and original out of it. And if you do finish the story, you can at least think of it as a completed work. It's something that in your mind you can say to yourself, okay, I finished that book and it didn't work out, but I'm going to set it aside. I accept that it didn't work. Maybe somewhere down the line I can come back to it months or years later. And that brings us to the second part of this video where we're going to talk about resurrecting your older stories or your older ideas. I have 3 tips for resurrecting old projects, and the first one is to wait for the right emotional push. What I mean by an emotional push is that sometimes when we write a story, we have a strong desire to make sense of something that's bothering us or something that's incomplete in our lives. Other times we might have a period of our lives that is defined by a certain emotion that we can connect to an old story that we gave up on and give it new life. This is something that has worked for me in the past. The core emotion that was at the heart of Bad Parts was one of desperation. The core emotion that was at the heart of Entry Wounds was one of anger. And these different emotions helped fuel me throughout the writing process. They helped compel me to get to the end because I wanted to make sense of why I was feeling a certain way during this period of my life. And I think if you do recognize how you feel about certain situations or how you feel about something that bothers you or something that's incomplete in your life, you can end up resurrecting an old story and making it better than it was the first time around. Tip number 2 is to embrace what worked and scrap what didn't. Anytime you write a story and it doesn't work out for you, whether you force yourself to finish it or you give up on it, there's always going to be certain good ideas that you had that you want to hold on to. Maybe these were the ideas that inspired you to write the story in the first place. Those ideas you want to hold on to. But everything else, if you had even major characters or major plot lines or major themes that didn't work for you, that just kind of drag the story down, don't be afraid to get rid of them. And the good thing about getting away from a project for months or even years is that distance creates clarity. And once you distance yourself from a story, you can start seeing, okay, this worked, this didn't, I know what I need to keep, and I know what I need to get rid of. And then tip number 3 is to bring at least one big new idea to your project. You want to take those good ideas that worked the first time around and you want to bring new ones to the project and combine them. This is where you start making a good story, because the first time around you already admitted that it didn't work. So you don't want to rewrite the same story over again. You want to bring some new ideas to the project. Maybe bring a brand new cast of characters. Maybe bring a completely different plot line or a completely different concept. Maybe a different setting. Maybe different themes. Figure out something new that you can bring to this project in order to give it new life and in order to compel yourself to write a new and exciting story. So I hope this helps. Question of the day: have you ever resurrected an old story that didn't work the first time? Let us know in the comments section below. Thank you guys for watching. If you want to support the channel, please pick up a copy of either one of my books. Bad Parts is great if you like small town horror. It's about people trading away their sick and injured body parts. Entry Wounds, as I mentioned, is about a guy who picks up a haunted gun and he cannot put it down until he kills 6 people with it. Also, be sure to check out my other videos, hit the like and subscribe buttons for me, share this video with a friend, and as always, remember to keep on writing.